I'm really excited you're here today. Hi, I'm Judy Shearwaters. Welcome to my channel. Here I bring you author interviews of ordinary people who had a story they had to share with the world. I also bring you short little writing prompts to get the creative juices going in your own brain, to get your own stories written down for your generations to come. Because you know what? You have a story to tell. Let me help you tell it. So today I have with us Ginny Dent Brant. She brings a unique perspective as a wife and mother who grew up in the halls of the power in Washington, D.C. She has battled cancer and has ministered in some of the most impoverished streets of our world where there is no freedom. Her career started early in life as a fashion model, but quickly changed serving on the front lines of our culture as a counselor, teacher, wellness advocate, and adjunct professor for 32 years. Jenny's platform of faith, family, freedom, and lifestyle changes communicates relevant truths which enable teenagers and women to prioritize their lives and use their freedoms to glorify Christ with an eternal perspective. She's the author of Finding True Freedom, From the White House to the World. Endorsed by Chuck Colson and Mike Huckabee, it traces their father-daughter journey and her simple prayer that took them from their days in the White House and Watergate to the mission field of Romania. The wisdom Jenny has gained from her background in cancer will challenge and inform any audience. Her second book, which was written after her journey with an aggressive breast cancer, Unleash Your God-Given Healing, 8 Steps to Prevent and Survive Cancer, was published in May of 2020. This book outlines the 8 steps Jenny implemented to help her doctors beat her cancer and restore her body after cancer treatments. These same steps also prevent Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, heart disease, and any flu or virus, including COVID-19. It's written with a foreword and commentary by oncologist Dr. Robert Elliott. Jenny is vibrant and healthy today, as you will see. I'll have her cancer prevention blog below in my show notes for you to take a look at later. So, without any further ado, as they say in show business, here's Ginny Dent Brant. Well, welcome, Jenny. How are you today?
I'm doing great all the way from South Carolina. It's going to be 80 degrees here today.
Awesome. Awesome. A beautiful, beautiful place. Yes. And I see we color coded today. That was awesome. Thank you for, picking up on my email, that said, please wear blue. I really didn't, but, but anyway, we are color coded just for my audience today. So, and I do want to apologize. I have, a throat problem going on, so I am kind of chewing on a cough drop, so please excuse that to my audience and to Jenny. But we're here to talk about your wonderful books, plural. Tell me, when did you start writing and what encouraged you to write your first book?
It was about 2008 when I went on a mission trip with my dad to Romania. And when I got back, the Baptist Press asked me if I would write a series on my trip with my dad to Romania. And then they asked me the next year if I would write one on my trip all through the Middle East with my husband with the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention. And then I went into China later on and they asked me to write a series about the underground church in China. So these were all 3 and 4 articles, together on one topic that I wrote. But everywhere I would go and I would speak about what happened in my family, which is now portrayed in the book, Finding True Freedom from the White House and the World, everyone would say, oh, you got to put that down in words. This is an unbelievable story. And so it was after my father died in 2007 that I began putting it down in words and trying to get it published. And again, it was a several-year process. So honestly, the first book was written totally out of gratitude for what God had done, because here was a family who my mother was diagnosed with severe depression when I was 16 years old. She was hospitalized. I was raising my younger brother, and here my father, who works for the President of the United States under Richard Nixon, was then being tried for Watergate. And so we had trials coming at every angle. And to see how God answered my prayers of salvation and purpose in the life of my mother and father, and for my mother to be healed of her depression. And he went so far beyond what I could have ever imagined. When I was in Romania, and I never prayed for any of this world ministry stuff to happen in my dad's life. I just wanted to know he'd be in heaven with me one day. And I wanted to get through the Watergate trials. And here we are with all these underground church leaders and all these churches he's planted. And it was a sense of gratitude, like, you know, look what God did because of a 16-year-old girl's prayers. You know, he went so far beyond anything I could have done or ever imagined. So that book was totally written out of gratitude for God and what he did for our family. We could have become a statistic. Instead, my parents went into full-time ministry and ministered to people all over the world, but especially in the country of Romania as they came to freedom after communism.
Wow. And you told me this is especially important for someone to pick up now with the Ukrainian happenings. Tell us how that would work in with Ukraine.
Well, the people in Romania, when my father first went over there after the communist walls fell, the people in Romania were hungry to have their religious freedom. And they had amassed this huge underground church. Something similar happened in the Ukraine. And so it was the people fighting for religious freedom that stood up in Romania and caused the communist walls to crumble. Literally, no one predicted it would happen. And when they tried to come to freedom after communism, it was still a struggle because they elected the former communist leaders. You know, that's all they had ever known. And they didn't know how to come to freedom. So in the Ukraine right now, you have what you had in Romania, where Romanians have now tasted freedom. They knew it before, then they went through 40 years of communism, and now they've tasted freedom, and they don't want to go back. And the Ukrainians, since 1991, have tasted freedom, and they do not want to go back to being under Russia's influence. Even though Russia says they're no longer a communist government, there's a lot of communism involved. And so they don't want to be under Putin. They want to be their own country. They're willing to put their lives on the line. And that's exactly the way that the Romanians feel. The last time I was in Romania was in 2008. I spoke in all 50 of the churches that my father helped to plant over there. And the Romanian underground church pastors who are now planted on the surface were saying to me, why are you in America going towards what we came from in Romania? Because we do not want to go back. Joseph San was one of the endorsers of my book. He was the leader of the underground Romania church. And he said this quote, and it's very powerful. Communism looks good. Oh, the government's going to take care of me, right? But it tastes terrible. And so once you've tasted communism, you do not want to go back. And that's what's happening in the Ukraine.
Wow. Very, very interesting. So what was the most difficult part of writing in your book? What was the most difficult part in writing that book?
Well, in that particular book, there were a lot of footnotes related to history. And my publisher said, you know, every time you say something that people don't know, generally don't know, we need one or two footnotes to back it up. So this extensive footnoting when I said something was very difficult, because finding those footnotes and those things, even though I knew it and I experienced it, I had to find something to back it up. And so when you write a memoir, because that's what we're talking about here, it takes the best of fiction techniques writing story and building momentum and
Mm-hmm.
allowing your readers to feel and experience with words and description rather than just telling. But it also takes the best of footnoting and being accurate, because this book is placed in history and
Mm-hmm.
every word of it is
Right.
true. And in order to back up what I was saying, one of the things you do for a memoir, most memoirs, is you get endorsements. My endorsements were the people who could validate that this story is true. I had Chuck Colson as my cover endorser on this book. And of course, he knew the story was true and was involved in the story and
Sure.
quoted throughout the story. And then I had Joseph San, the leader of the underground church in Romania. And then, I just had all these congressmen and senators and people who knew part of the story. I almost got President George Herbert Bush, but he
Oh.
does not endorse books. And he gave it consideration, and he finally said, I can't open that door because I have a policy of not endorsing books. If I endorse yours, and I know the story to be true, then the floodgate will open.
Mm.
So the endorsements are key in a book like this to validate that, this story is not just something this 16-year-old girl has made up. Every word of it is true. And I had someone from every part of the story to validate through the endorsement that,
Right.
this
Hmm.
is true.
So how long did it take you to complete that book?
That book was definitely 2 years of research and writing, another year to get it published. I did find a publisher. And then once you get it published, that's not all there is to it. Then there's the marketing of the
Mm.
book. I did
So true.
interviews on that book. I did about 50 interviews on that book. And one of my interviews was, I did a lot of Atlanta TV stations and all the TV stations in South Carolina, but I did the Crystal Cathedral
Mm.
before it, was sold. They had the largest viewing audience of any TV program. And so I flew to Los Angeles with my husband to be interviewed on that program, and flew right back to work the next morning, flew on the red eye special, and went to my school to work, at 7 o'clock the next morning after missing the night's sleep. But, there was a lot of interviews nationwide on that book. So
Sure.
it's not just about writing and editing, although because it was my first book and I did not know what I was doing, it took a long time. And Chuck Colson, being my cover endorser, and he only endorses 2 books a year, but he'd occasionally call me and
Wow.
say, okay, how's the book coming? He was having dental surgery. He goes, how's the book coming? I can barely talk. But he kept telling me, you really need to get a with. A with means you write a book and someone professional comes behind you and stages and does all this stuff. It's very expensive to do. And I told him, I said, Chuck, I can't afford that. So I had to be the one to learn how to write the book and do it. And so, it was, because it was my first book, yes, I was learning as I was going. I edited more than most people. I probably went through some chapters 30 and 40 times,
Sure.
getting it right, looking for mistakes, learning techniques and making it better, because it had to pass by Chuck Colson, and he gets 1,000 requests. At the time, he got 1,000 requests to endorse books, and he
Wow.
only did 2 a year. And if it wasn't of high quality, then he could not endorse the book as dictated by his ministry. So that was a big standard to have to jump over. And finally, he called me up and he said, the book is of the quality I can endorse it, and I'm proud to endorse it. So
Awesome.
that was a lot of pressure, though. I will tell you, that was a lot of pressure.
Oh, I'm sure. How did you decide on the book cover? I see that's your dad's picture on there.
Yes, and that was a picture taken in Australia. It was my favorite picture of my dad. Now, that's a story behind that. I had to hunt down the photographer because that was on a cover of a magazine in Australia.
Oh.
And I had the picture to use, but copyright laws say I must get permission from that person. And it took me a year to track down the photographer and get written permission, and I had to pay him a fee for that. But that picture was important enough to me to do it.
Right.
And just the publishing company that I worked with I gave them the picture. They did all the background with the Capitol and the White House. And then I gave them some scrapbook pictures. I thought they did a great job on the cover, showing that it was a memoir and that it had to do with Washington, D.C. and, patriotism. And, that's why it's called Finding True Freedom. But in the book, my dad and I found true freedom, not in Washington, D.C., but in finding and following God's will for our lives. Okay. So the book starts out, as Chuck Colson told me to do, it starts out as a secular book. And then as you go on, you're going to live and feel and experience the change in this man's life as Watergate brings him to his knees and my mother to her knees through her depression. And God just totally revolutionizes their life, and you can see and feel and touch it. Now, my other book, which is also a memoir, Unleash Your God-Given Healing, the cover, I came up with the pictures for the cover, and I thought they did a good job on that one too. But the background is a tornado, because when they did an MRI after I was diagnosed with cancer, the surgeon called me in to discuss the results of the MRI, and I wasn't expecting anything to be worse. They'd already told me, number one, it's cancer. Number two, it's aggressive. No one wants to hear those two things. Then he tells me, oh, it looks like it's planted other tumors. It's in your lymph nodes and in other parts of your body. That's stage 4 aggressive cancer. And so I was devastated, and I made him show me the MRI because I did not believe him. I felt perfectly fine. And so he flashed it up on this life-size screen. And I looked at him and I said, it looks like a tornado has invaded my body. So there's the significance of the tornado. And let me say this too. My second book, Unleash Your God-Given Healing, is an analogy to the Wizard of Oz. Let me go back to the first book for a minute. Chuck Colson gave me some good advice. He said, Ginny, you need to have a theme that ties your book together. And I thought about that for several months, and then it hit me. Dance. My mom and dad met at a dance. My father taught me how to dance. My dad and I danced to the same tune for many years, and then I became Christian and began spinning in a different direction, and he was spinning in the opposite direction. And then once he came to Christ, we were dancing to the same tune again, but this time to our Heavenly Father's dance. Okay, so that was the the theme I tied everything together with for that memoir. For Unleash Your God-Given Healing, it was an analogy to the Wizard of Oz, because here I am sitting in the Chicago hospital where I lived most of the year, off and on, flying back and forth, and I'm giving updates to my prayer list, and I'm saying things like lions and tigers and bears, oh my, chemotherapy, right? And so it just naturally came to my mind. And so I sat there and watched The Wizard of Oz again, and I caught about 10 more analogies. And so every chapter begins with a scripture, and every chapter ends with a tie-in with biblical values, and then a tie-in to The Wizard of Oz to kind of lighten it up, because we're talking about a serious subject. For example, the first step in the book, because it's 8 steps to prevent and survive cancer, is proper hydration. So at the end of the book, I start with Jesus being the living water, and how much our body needs water, just like our spirit needs Jesus. And then I go through all the scientific information, how I used it in the cancer journey and what I learned from it. And then I get to the end and I go, Dorothy killed the witch with what? A bucket of water. You think they'll ever forget proper hydration now? So I used The Wizard of Oz all the way from the beginning to the end. And it's because that's what I saw on that MRI. Oh my goodness. And when I went into chemotherapy, it was lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, So this girl in my memoir, the second memoir, this girl's just trying to, like Dorothy, she's trying to get back home. I'm trying to get back to a normal life after a tornado has invaded my body. Okay. Right. So that's the analogy there.
Good. How did it feel to write out your whole cancer journey and then read it back to yourself? How did that feel?
Well, it was a lot of hard work. There were some days, I have to tell you this up front, Judy, when I was at the cancer hospital, and I met with the chaplain because I just didn't understand. I got a cancer I had no risk factors for, no genetics for. It made absolutely no sense until I took a deeper dive. And the hospital chaplain said to me, Ginny, whatever, just consider this a gift from God for you to help other people. And I looked at him and I said, you don't understand, chaplain. I don't want this gift. I don't want to talk about cancer. I don't want to speak about cancer. I don't want to write about cancer. I do not want to be the cancer queen. I was going to keep it quiet. But the more I researched and the more I learned, the more I felt compelled to share what I had learned with other people so that they would not get cancer, that they could possibly prevent it, and then also help people get through the journey, because I uncovered a lot of really common sense, some of them easy things to do, some inexpensive things to do that would make the journey better and prevent you from getting cancer to begin with. Go back to your question again. I didn't totally answer it.
No, I mean, how did it make you feel after you had written it all out? And was it like
things, well, it was cathartic in some ways, but when I looked back and had to write it out, I began to connect dots of God's hand all through my cancer journey that I maybe didn't see before. From the very first moments I'm diagnosed, when I first got the cancer news, right before then, 3 mammograms missed my cancer.
Wow.
It was missed over and over and over again. I certainly didn't feel bad. I just done the Cooper River Bridge run, and that night, this ring gets tangled in my nightie. And as I'm trying to free it, I felt the lump. If I had not felt that lump with an aggressive cancer and it had gone on 9 more months until I saw my doctor again, they would have felt it by then.
Yeah.
That's aggressive cancer. But it could have been all over my body and too difficult to stop.
Yeah.
And so the fact that I found it when I did was the providence of God. I wasn't looking to find it.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So just so many things like that I discovered in the journey, that, God was there working through everything that happened. As we were praying for guidance, he was opening and closing doors, and I discovered things. I said, Lord, show me what I need to change, because evidently I caused this and I need to know what I need to change. And some of the things that I discovered were purely accidental. I wasn't looking to discover that. I didn't know that was a possibility. And it's like God pulled back the curtain for me so that I could uncover information to help me that I would then share with other people.
All through that journey, I'm sure you kept a binder, a notebook or something. You journaled about it. What did you do to keep your notes all straight throughout that?
What I did was I kept the prayer updates that I sent out weekly, where I would inform people what was going on. And some of them were comical, and some of them were hysterical. But that was kind of my journaling, as I was telling them what I was facing and what I would need prayer for. And people would say to me, I'm learning just from what you are going through and what you're discovering, and you really need to put this in a book.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of pastors contact me and say, this would be helpful information for people in my congregation, because too many people are getting cancer, and you're uncovering some very important practical truths here. So I did struggle with writing it down and going through the discipline. Here I am going through chemo, doing this, researching and writing this down. Then I had chemo for over a year. Then I had chemotherapy by mouth, which gives you brain fog, for an additional 5 years. And so all this time I'm writing and doing all this technical work. And so some days I really didn't want to do it, but my desire to help other people is what got me over that hump. And I just got through it, knowing I was going to make a lot of editing mistakes. And I had several friends that went behind me. Friends can be wonderful. One was a nurse. One was an English teacher. I had about 4 or 5 people that I thanked in the beginning of my book, because they would go through and catch mistakes that I would make that I would normally not make. And it was because of the drugs and the chemo and all the different things I was going through. So it was a difficult book to write. And again, heavy. This was more footnotes than the other book, and times had changed since the other book because of the internet. So every time I have 300 links in my book to medical research. So every time I did a link to medical research, I couldn't just have the link. I had to have all the written out stuff, a certain style, and then I had to have the link. And then I kept having to recheck the links up until right when the book's published. I had to recheck again. The links change sometimes.
Wow.
And so the footnoting was the most difficult thing about writing a book. And this book, definitely, it was the most difficult thing. And let me say this too, because I was writing about things that had to do with the body and medical science. I was not writing from the doctor's perspective. I'm clearly writing from the patient's perspective. But because I'm having to back it up with medical research, I had to validate everything I was saying. And the most wonderful thing that God provided that I couldn't have provided was, everyone kept saying, you've got to have an oncologist to be your forward. And then they said, you need more than that. You need an oncologist coming behind you to validate each one of these steps. And God provided that for me. A friend calls me up one day and says, I want to connect you with Dr. Robert Elliott, 55-year veteran oncologist and medical researcher. And I said, why do you want to connect us? He said, because you two are alike in the way you sound, in the way you think. He believes in lifestyle changes. He believes that cancer is more than chemo, surgery, radiation. It's your attitude. It's what you eat. It's all these things put together. So he connected us, and he became the man who wrote the foreword and wrote commentary throughout the book, validating what I was saying. And, again, God provided him. I could not have provided that, because I was the rock star cancer patient at Cancer Treatment Centers of America. And all my doctors would tell you that. But they were forbidden by a rule of the board that they cannot endorse any cancer patient's books.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway. And so that's why, God just miraculously provided this man for me, and we saw eye to eye, and I learned from him. And then I would uncover new research that I would share with him, and he would tell you he learned from the research I uncovered.
Wow.
So we became very good friends, and it was like a daughter-father relationship. So
Sure. Well, what was the most difficult part in marketing that book? How did you go about marketing that?
Well, to be perfectly honest, it was difficult because it was released right after the pandemic. And Amazon was not shipping out books. So if your book wasn't already on Amazon, they couldn't store it. So people would order it, and it would say, wait several months. People were not buying this type of book during the pandemic. You would think they would be buying this type of book, because the 8 steps in my book would help you to lessen your symptoms of COVID if you got it, and even help you, prevent you from possibly getting COVID. If you did this in addition to social distancing and following the CDC guidelines. But it was difficult because a lot of magazines I would have normally had interviews with, some of them shut down. A lot of the TV stations shut down. Now, some of the radio, some of the TV was still going. During the pandemic, I'm driving to Florida to be interviewed on CTN. I did a CBN interview on this book, and that was out of my home by something like Zoom. And so, things started to change. But the type of books that were selling during the pandemic were, number one, children's books to try to keep the children entertained at home. And number two, people wanted a fiction fantasy to take them away from the news and from what was going on. They didn't want a reality book that would help them with their health to get through the pandemic. You would think
they would.
You would think, but that's not what they were looking for. So here's what I did, Judy. I realized very quickly, I said, here's 8 steps in my book. I knew they help prevent dementia and Alzheimer's, heart disease, everything in the book. So I started researching, how does this apply to flus and viruses such as COVID-19? And all of the same steps applied. And so I got the research for that, and the press release became, what cancer patient learns from Cancer Journey can be applied to COVID.
Wow. Wow.
And that's where I got the interviews, from that press release with that type of title.
Mm-hmm.
If anything this pandemic has taught us is that as Americans, we have lots of underlying conditions that made COVID worse.
Right.
And if we would take better, if it should have taught us that we should, here we've got a vaccine finally, and but the thing was, we had nothing. I mean, it was a dangerous pandemic.
Sure.
And our lifestyle was making it worse. And we needed to, instead of sitting at home on the sofa, being sedentary all day, we needed to be getting up and walking outside, even if you stayed in your own yard. You didn't need to be sitting on that sofa, sedentary, eating potato chips all day.
True.
Sales went up during this pandemic.
Right.
We needed to be eating fruits and vegetables and plants and God's food that he gave us to build our immune system. So we kind of did a lot of things wrong. And the book was very relevant to people who could open their ears and open their hearts and realize, what can I do in addition to what the CDC is saying? Because the CDC guidelines were good, but the research clearly showed that even if you took the vaccine, if you didn't have a healthy lifestyle, it wasn't as likely to work properly in your system.
Right.
If you're not following the 8 steps in my book and you go get the vaccine, it might help you somewhat, but it's going to help you more if you are moving, if you're hydrating, if you're eating healthy foods, if you're working against the vaccine, it's not going to help as much. So really, this whole pandemic should have made us realize that God gave us a wonderful, amazing body, self-healing, self-repairing, built with a memory to fight flus and viruses. And the best thing, if you got COVID, one of the advantages was you would have natural immunity.
Sure.
And I still got natural immunity from getting it over a year ago. They just tested me again. My immunity is sky high for everything, but especially for COVID. Why? Because I got it, and God designed our bodies with a memory system and an intricate immune system that now knows how to fight COVID-19. So
Awesome.
you have to relate your book to what's going on in the world when the news changes overnight. And that's what got me a lot of interviews, was being able to do that, because it definitely could relate.
Okay. Well, that's good advice for new authors, but is there any other advice you would give to a first-time author in writing their memoir?
Well, I would definitely say be very cautious if your memoir or book requires footnoting. Keep the website, because now you're expected to do both. Keep the website on a note card or in something in your computer, and keep all of the data for that, because I would look back and my handwriting was so bad sometimes that I couldn't read my own handwriting. And then I had to go back and find that research again. And so you've got to be, if you're going to have to footnote for that memoir or that book, you need to be very, very careful about keeping up with all of those, with all that data somewhere on your computer.
Sure. Okay. All right. And now what, Jenny? Another book, or what's new for author Ginny Dent Brant?
Well, I'm still getting ready to go to NRB next week to promote this book. And I've been promoting it now for a year and a half. But my husband and I have talked about writing a book about his life through his parents' eyes. His parents were both deaf.
Oh.
Could not hear and only spoke in sign language.
Oh my goodness.
And when they were born in the in the 20s, deaf people were highly discriminated against in this country, and handicapped people. And so they grew up during the years of extreme discrimination. And through their eyes, how things changed, where today, if you look on TV, you'll see a deaf person in every other commercial, and all in these dramas on TV, and deaf people are respected, and they realize they can learn and they have value. So it would be through his life growing up as the son of deaf parents, and how he helped to open the doors to, squelch this discrimination everywhere it was. He was like the Martin Luther King of the deaf world because he was born into the deaf world. And so that's what we've thought about doing. And I'm not sure our marriage could survive. He doesn't like editing things for me when I'm writing and then me not choosing what he edited. But he doesn't know the rules of writing. So it would be me telling him a lot of things to do. So we might have to bring in a third person so he couldn't argue with them. But we have thought about it because it is an interesting story
Sure.
of going from, the life of a deaf couple and how things changed. By the time they died, they were one of the most respected people in the town that they lived in. But when they were born, their parents were embarrassed to tell anyone they were deaf, and they kind of hid them in shame.
Oh my goodness.
So I mean, so many things changed. And
Sure.
So yeah, we have thought about writing something like that. That will probably be the next thing.
Okay. Well, good. Well, this has been really fun and exciting. I'm so glad we did this, and I'm going to get both of your books, the Unleash Your God-Given Healing for me and Finding True Freedom for my husband. Of course, I'll borrow his too, so anyway, they both look like great reads and a lot of great information to live by. So very good. So Ginny, I give out writing prompts on my YouTube channel to encourage others to get their creative juices going and write their own stories. Can you give my audience a writing prompt?
Sure. When you're going through a trial in your life, first thing I would do is, even though everything around you looks negative, okay, I want you to start journaling and writing down all the good things that are happening in the midst of the trial. When I did that, I was overwhelmed at how God was working. And also another writing prompt would be, when you're in the middle of a trial, or when you've just finished a trial and you've just made it through, is to go back and look for the hand of God throughout your trial. I mean, Joseph could clearly see it at the end. He didn't see everything when he was going through it, but sometimes when the trial is over, and sometimes we don't see it till we get to heaven, but we can look back and see the hand of God, like me finding the lump because my ring got caught in my nightie. That was God, I got my first opinion was stage 4 aggressive cancer. So it forced me, I was so scared and we were so horrified, it forced me to get on a plane and fly to a top-notch cancer center who reversed the decision and said, yes, you've got aggressive cancer. Yes, you've got this. Yes, you've got that. But it's not necessarily all over your body. That's inflammation all over your body caused from a biopsy that went bad. Our second opinion's important. Yes, would I have gotten that if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't gotten such horrible news? I might not have,
Right.
So you look back and you see the hand of God in helping me to discover things about what caused my cancer, because the doctors couldn't find it. Well, doggone it, I found it. I kept looking and praying, and God uncovered it and pulled back the curtain on cancer for me. So, the book is, when you look back on a trial, when you're done, you can see the hand of God. I can see it in Finding True Freedom now. I can see it in Unleash Your God-Given Healing, that God was there from the first moments we began to pray in both circumstances, and he was working behind the scenes. And it's just a great writing exercise to document or journal about that when the trial is over and time has passed, where you can start to see some of these things come to light.
Very good. Very good. I like that a lot. So, well, I thank you, Jenny. I'm going to have Jenny's cancer blog in my show notes, and I will also have links to her books, so that you can rush out and get those books right away, because they
Let me say one thing about the cancer prevention blog. I posted yesterday on the 6 benefits of blueberries for longevity and preventing cancer and enhancing our health. And it is amazing.
Okay.
That it hits heart, lungs, dementia, cancer, build your immune system, even cuts off blueberries. We eat a cup every day now because of the research I discovered.
Huh.
A cup of blueberries helps to cut off the blood supply to cancer tumors.
Wow. I love blueberries.
Just
Who knew?
things like that. Who would have ever guessed,
Yeah.
So these are the type of things that are in the book that I discovered. And blueberries, I do talk about that in the book, but on the blog, I go into detail about one thing more deeply that I couldn't do in the book, or new things that I've learned. New things are coming out every few weeks. There's some new research on something we didn't know before. That's medical science. It's just the way it is. So they really need to sign up for that cancer prevention blog. It's also a wellness blog, and same things you do for cancer, the same things you do for every disease, even COVID-19. So
right. Well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you. I've really enjoyed my time with you, and I know my audience will too. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. I do hope that you enjoyed hearing from Jenny today, and that you might pick up a copy of one of her books or both of them. They sound like great reads. I will definitely be getting both of them myself. But I wanted you to also remember to maybe try out her writing prompt. Think about a time when you went through something horrendous, and after it was all over, what were your thoughts and how you went through it? Take some time and write it down. Write it down right now. Did you see God there once you went through all of that? Or was there anything else that maybe you learned through that experience? So I will have all of her information, her contact information, in the show notes down below. But if you enjoy receiving author interviews like this, or short little writing prompts that I bring to you from time to time, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Click that little bell there so that you're notified every time I bring out another video like this. So until next time, you have a story to tell. Let me help you tell it.